The image is seared into the cultural consciousness. A woman in flowing black lace and chiffon, a shawl draped over her arms like ethereal wings, a cascade of blonde curls catching the stage lights as she spins, lost in a song that feels like a spell. For over 5 decades, Stevie Nicks has been more than a rock star. She has been a high priestess of heartache, a mystical oracle whose lyrics served as confessions and whose stage presence was a form of ritual. She gave voice to a generation's complexities, the ecstasy of freedom, the agony of love's dissolution, and the quiet strength found in solitude. But the myth of Stevie Nicks, the untouchable rock goddess, has always been a fragile veneer over a life of profound struggle. Now, at 76, the woman behind the legend exists in a state of poignant duality. While her voice still commands arenas, the life she leads is increasingly defined by isolation, profound loss, and the heavy solitude that comes from outliving so many of the chapters and people that made her story. To understand the sadness that now colors her twilight years, one must first look at the foundation upon which her resilience was built. Born Stephanie Lynn Nicks in Phoenix, Arizona, in 1948, her childhood was one of constant movement, her father's career in corporate management shuttling the family across the American Southwest. This nomadic existence forged an early sense of interiority. An asthmatic child often kept on the sidelines, she found her sanctuary not in playgrounds but in the fantastical worlds of fairy tales and the melodies her grandfather, A.J. Nicks, taught her. He was an amateur country singer, and their bond was sealed in music. When he died during her teenage years, it was a cataclysmic loss that planted the seed for her life's work, music as a vessel for memory, a way to keep the departed alive. The guitar her parents gave her at 16 wasn't just an instrument, it was a lifeline. It was in the hallways of Menlo Atherton High School in California that she reunited with Lindsey Buckingham, a meeting of creative equals that would become the axis around which her destiny would spin. Their early years were a testament to a shared obsessive dream, a partnership that was both romantic and artistic, forged in the crucible of poverty and late-night songwriting sessions. They were so intertwined that when Mick Fleetwood came calling in 1974, Lindsey's condition for joining the band was simple and non-negotiable. Stevie comes too. It was the ultimatum that would launch one of the most successful and tumultuous eras in rock history. The arrival of the Buckingham-Nicks duo into the fold of Fleetwood Mac transformed the British blues band into a California rock juggernaut. The 1975 self-titled album was a commercial awakening, but it was the 1977 follow-up, Rumors, that became a phenomenon of a different order. Yet, the world was buying a soundtrack to heartbreak that was being lived in real time. The recording of Rumors was a masterclass in turning trauma into art. As the romance between Stevie and Lindsey imploded, they stood in the same studio, forcing themselves to sing love songs to each other that had curdled into accusations. Stevie's Dreams, written in a moment of clarity while sitting in the studio's lounge, became the band's only #1 hit, a soft, melancholic prophecy of moving on. Lindsey's Go Your Own Way was a public, angry response, blaming her for the collapse. The internal politics were a soap opera. Stevie's subsequent affair with the married Mick Fleetwood added another layer of combustible chaos to the group's dynamic. For Stevie, the success was a gilded cage. The public adored her mystical persona, the witchy woman draped in shawls she collected from vintage shops. But that persona was a costume she wore to hide a woman in free fall. The relentless touring schedule, the cocaine use that started as a tool to keep up with the band's punishing pace, and the constant emotional warfare with her ex-lover left her brittle. She was burning the candle at both ends, and the flame was her own well-being. The Rumors era gave her everything she had ever dreamed of: fame, fortune, a platform, but it also exacted a toll that would take decades to reconcile. As the 1980s dawned, Stevie embarked on a solo career that confirmed her status as a singular force, not just a member of a legendary band. Belladonna 1981 was a masterpiece of California rock, a #1 debut that yielded classics like Edge of 17 and Leather and Lace. She had successfully stepped out of the shadow of Fleetwood Mac's collective identity, proving she could soar on her own. But the solo success only intensified the pressure. She was now juggling 2 careers, and the cocaine addiction that had taken root in the late 70s tightened its grip. It was a period of high creativity and even higher self-destruction. The intervention that led her to the Betty Ford Center in 1986 was a public reckoning. She entered rehab with the world's eyes upon her, determined to shed the chemical dependency that was threatening to kill her. But in a tragic twist that would define the next decade of her life, doctors prescribed the benzodiazepine Klonopin to ease her transition out of rehab, meant as a temporary stabilizer. Instead, it became a chemical cage. For nearly 8 years, Stevie has described this period as a fog. Unlike cocaine, which fueled her manic energy, Klonopin stole her creativity. It silenced the songwriting that had been her primary means of processing pain. She gained weight, withdrew from friendships, and, most devastatingly for an artist whose identity was so tied to her craft, she stopped writing. The silence was a deeper agony than any tabloid scandal. It was a period where the woman who had given the world so many anthems of survival felt she had lost her own voice, trapped in a chemical stupor that numbed the very pain she had always transformed into art. The 1990s brought a slow, painful reclamation, but it was also a decade marked by symbolic betrayals that cut to the core of her artistic identity. One of the most enduring wounds dated back to the rumor sessions, the omission of Silver Springs from the album. Buckingham had argued against including the song, a sweeping, bitter masterpiece written as a retort to Go Your Own Way, and it was relegated to the B-side of a single. For Stevie, this was not merely a business decision, it was a silencing. It felt like her side of the story, her artistic response to their shared heartbreak, was deemed less important. This sense of being muted by the male-dominated machinery of the music industry festered for 2 decades. It wasn't until the band's 1997 reunion, The Dance, that she got her vindication. Performing Silver Springs live, she locked eyes with Buckingham, her voice cracking with a fury and sorrow that time had not diminished. The performance was a masterclass in emotional excavation, a moment where she reclaimed her narrative in front of 50 million viewers. It was a powerful reminder that her voice, both literally and metaphorically, could not be suppressed. But the path to that stage had been arduous. After leaving Fleetwood Mac in the early 90s, she had spent years in the Klonopin haze, barely able to function. Her voice, once an ethereal soprano, had become raspy and strained from years of screaming over loud stage monitors without proper technique. Critics wondered if she was finished. Her decision to begin vocal training with a coach named Steve Reel in the late 90s was an act of quiet desperation and profound humility. It was a commitment to rebuilding her instrument from the ground up, a physical manifestation of her will to survive. As the new millennium progressed, Stevie found a level of stability, but it was a stability built on the foundation of increasing solitude. She continued to tour with Fleetwood Mac and release solo work, but the narrative of her life began to shift from one of youthful struggle to one of elder endurance, marked by a series of devastating losses. The death of her mother Barbara in 2011 was a blow from which she admits she never fully recovered. Barbara had been her confidant, her anchor, the one constant presence through the chaos of fame and addiction. Stevie's grief was paralyzing. She has spoken of being unable to leave her house for months, finding solace, not in the company of others, but in private rituals. She filled her days with candles, journals, and a deepening sense of spiritual connection to the other side. What to outsiders looked like severe isolation, she reframed as a continued conversation with her mother, a form of survival that kept her tethered to her own history. But the most shattering loss came in 2022 with the death of Christine McVie, her bandmate and closest friend. While the public narrative often centered on the feud between Stevie and Lindsay, the quiet bond between the two women of Fleetwood Mac was the band's true emotional anchor. They were a sisterhood within the storm. Christine's presence was a calming, grounding force, a fellow woman who understood the unique pressures of being the girls in the band. When McVie died after a brief illness, Stevie was devastated. She stated unequivocally that without Christine, there was no reason for Fleetwood Mac to continue. This was not the bitter end of a tumultuous relationship, it was the acknowledgement that the soul of the band had departed. For Stevie, it was the closing of a chapter she had carried for nearly 50 years, leaving her as the sole survivor of a familial unit she had helped create. Now, in her late 70s, the life Stevie Nicks leads is one of stark contradictions, a reality that many fans find profoundly sad. On stage, she remains a marvel, a consummate performer who still commands arenas with a presence that belies her age. But the energy has shifted. Her movements are more deliberate, the spinning less frenetic, the voice is lower, huskier, weathered by time and the residue of old damage, yet it still carries an emotional weight that can silence a stadium. Offstage, however, she has retreated into a world of her own making. She lives in a gated estate in the Los Angeles hills, a world she controls meticulously. She rarely socializes, preferring the company of her small circle of assistants, her goddaughters, and a memory of the loved ones she has lost. Her recent years have been punctuated not by new creative risks, but by controversy and physical frailty. In 2025, as she announced a new North American tour, she was met with a wave of online fury over exorbitant ticket prices, with longtime fans feeling priced out of a connection they had maintained for decades. Old accusations resurfaced, such as the lore surrounding her refusal to headline Glastonbury Festival years prior over pay disputes, painting a picture of a legend more concerned with the bottom line than with the spiritual connection her fans believe they shared. For those who had worshipped her as a symbol of artistic purity, it was a jarring dissonance. Simultaneously, a shoulder injury forced her to postpone a series of shows, a stark reminder of the physical limitations that come with age. The woman who once danced like a spirit through the night is now a body that betrays her, requiring care and caution. And yet, in this period of quiet isolation and commercial backlash, she is preparing for what may be her most raw artistic statement, a new solo album, her first in over a decade, which she has playfully referred to as the Ghost Record. Announced in early 2025, the project is rumored to be a series of autobiographical songs reflecting on the great loves and significant men who passed through her life: Lindsey Buckingham, Don Henley, Mick Fleetwood, Joe Walsh. For fans, the anticipation is electric, but it is laced with a melancholic understanding. This is not the work of a woman in the throes of life, but a retrospective, a final act of naming names and settling scores. It feels less like a creative peak and more like a reckoning, a closing of accounts before the ledger is closed for good. The title itself, The Ghost Record, evokes the spectral presence of memory, of lives lived and loves lost. It is the work of an artist who has spent her career veiling her truths in metaphor and mysticism, now hinting at a brutal, unfiltered honesty. The sadness here is in the urgency. It suggests a woman aware that time is running out to tell her own story in her own words, to correct the record before the final curtain falls. What defines Stevie Nicks today is not the magic of her youth or the chaos of her prime, but the profound solitude of survival. She has outlived her greatest love, Lindsey, at least as the partner of her youth, her closest friend Christine, and the mother who was her anchor. She lives in the echo of her own massive legacy, a legacy that has given her wealth and adoration, but has also stripped her of anonymity and simplicity. The life she leads now is quieter, more fragile, and undeniably tinged with sadness. It is the sadness of the survivor who has watched the ensemble cast of her life take their final bows, leaving her alone on the stage. Her choice to continue performing, to release new music, is not just a testament to her work ethic, it is a necessity. For a woman who has defined herself by her creativity, to stop would be to succumb to the silence she fought so hard to escape. So, she continues, wrapped in her shawls, singing her songs. Each performance is an act of endurance, a ritual to stave off the quiet that waits at home. The sadness of Stevie Nicks' life at 76 is not a story of failure. It is the bittersweet, inevitable tragedy of an artist who gave everything to her art, and in doing so, built a world for herself that, in its final chapter, has become a beautiful, lonely palace for one.